Our next presenter is Erin Murphy-Graham. She will be presenting on promoting women's empowerment and rural development, a case study on the tutorial learning system in Honduras. And Dr. Erin Murphy, before joining the faculty at Berkeley, was a research associate at the Harvard Study for Decisions in Education. As a part of a multidisciplinary research team, she investigated the role of evaluation evidence in decision-making about the popular school-based drug prevention program, DARE, at the local, state, and federal levels. She has also worked as a consultant to government agencies and NGOs in Honduras, Colombia, and Nicaragua. She has co-taught courses on program evaluation, research design, education reform in developing countries, and international education policy. She's currently teaching at Berkeley, courses on gender and education and international education.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here this afternoon, all of you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you very much to the BIC for inviting me to be here this afternoon. So as Duncan said, I'm going to be presenting results from a research study that I conducted on the Honduran program Sistema de Aprendizaje Tutorial. And in preparing my remarks for today, I found helpful looking at the discussion paper that was prepared by the women's major group, and also the resolution that has been passed by the General Assembly regarding the advancement of women. I don't think I'm able to control this. Are you going to?
I can.
Okay. I didn't know if I clapped. So would you mind going to the next one?
Just be prepared for spontaneous musical outbursts.
Yes. So the presentation is going to briefly summarize my research on how education can be used as a tool to promote rural development and women's empowerment. And just in a nutshell, my research suggests that the SAT program empowers women by increasing their knowledge, self-confidence, awareness of gender equality. My findings also suggest that SAT enables women to participate fully in public life. And then finally, the piece of my research that I think is the most interesting, and I'll spend the majority of my time talking about, is the way in which men's attitudes and roles changed. And I think this is a critical barrier to promoting gender equality and to rural development. And so just to briefly refresh your memory about some of the key issues and there we go, thank you. Some of the key issues and challenges that have been identified by the women's major group in the document that they prepared for the CSD 16, and the way in which the SAT program responds to these. I want to just start with that very, very briefly. So we all know that gender inequality is slowing progress right towards development. Part of overcoming gender inequality is to empower women to become full participants in all arenas of life, particularly those from which they have traditionally been excluded. Now, Taco summarized so beautifully some of the major declarations and policy statements that have been amazing accomplishments, I would say, in the last 20 to 30 years in terms of promoting this agenda of women's empowerment, in terms of identifying how women's empowerment and gender equality are economic issues, and they're also social issues. But the question that remains is, how do we do this? How do we empower women? What does women's empowerment look like? And then also, finally, what is the role of education in potentially sparking this process of empowerment? And so those are the issues that I'm very interested in as a researcher. And the project that I will be describing briefly very nicely responds to several of the priority areas that have been identified. If you haven't had a chance to yet look at this document that was prepared, it does a wonderful job of highlighting, I think, some of these critical things like the high levels of poverty and an unbalanced workload, the double burden of under-recognized and undervalued labor. So many of the things that the co-panelists have highlighted, education, we know, can be a powerful tool in trying to change gender relations that have resulted in women's inequality. But what is women's empowerment, and what do I mean by women's empowerment? So we use this term a lot. We see it mentioned very frequently in documents such as the Millennium Development Goals. We see it in UN statements and reports. And there is no one agreed upon definition of empowerment, but there are a couple of components of empowerment that are broadly agreed upon. First is the idea that empowerment is a process. It is not a static state. Second, that empowerment is context specific. So the ways we might measure empowerment in one context will not carry over to all contexts. The third is the concept of agency, and I think this is very, very important. It's the idea that individuals, particularly women, need to be protagonists in the process of development. No one can empower someone else, but rather women themselves are the key actors. They are the protagonists in the empowerment process. And then fourth is the idea that empowerment is relational. Okay, so people don't become empowered in a vacuum, but rather in relationships to other people. And I think the critical person, most likely in a woman's life, is her domestic partner. So is her husband, is the person that she is sharing a household with. And that feature, I think, has traditionally been overlooked in our discussions of women's empowerment. So the case study. And as I mentioned, there are a variety. We can go through this quickly and go to the next one, but there's a number of areas that this case study highlights. And also, just to also say that in this discussion paper, the need to have a discussion about more cases was highlighted. And so I look forward to having this opportunity to discuss the case. Okay, so just to very, very briefly summarize what the SAT program is. Again, it's an acronym that stands for Sistema de Aprendizaje Tutorial, or the Tutorial Learning System. It was developed in the late 1970s by a Colombian organization called Fundaec, which stands for the Foundation for the Application and Teaching of the Sciences. It targets rural and marginalized youth, also adults, and it provides access to secondary level education. So the target population is between the ages of 12 and 18 years of age. It is a co-educational program. I think that is really important to say because often when I talk about this project, people assume because I'm talking about women's empowerment that I'm talking about an initiative that only targets women. This is a co-educational program. It targets women as well as men. Finally, NGOs play a very important role in the training and monitoring of the program together with the Ministry of Education. Now I'm going over the initiative very quickly. Go to the next slide, please. In part because tomorrow the VIC is hosting a learning center that will take place at 10 a.m., 10 to 1, and we would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to the learning center so that you can learn more about this intervention that is very, very promising. The goal of the intervention is not women's empowerment per se. It has a much broader goal of developing attitudes, knowledge, and skills for more self-reliant development. The program does this through an emphasis on problem solving and critical thinking. An interesting feature of the program is that it's not a traditional education program in that it has many different subject areas, but it organizes knowledge around what are called capability areas. And these capabilities are thought of as the capabilities required to start a process of both individual growth and participation in